So the drama has unfolded, the dust has settled, and Tony Bellew has emerged victorious over David Haye. We've discussed that enough on this channel now. People are probably getting bored of it. But one thing people are interested in, and I know they're interested in because I've got a number of messages on it, are the pay-per-view numbers and the suggestion that this fight has smashed it in terms of the pay-per-view numbers. I've heard from a lot of sources that I can't necessarily say are completely reputable and completely trustworthy, but I've heard anywhere from about 600,000 pay-per-view buys through to about 800,000 pay-per-view buys, and a lot of people out there seem to be settling on the number of 750,000 pay-per-view buys. Eddie Hearn came out in a recent interview with IFL TV and said that this was one of the most successful pay-per-view cards of all time in the UK, and said that the numbers had surpassed all expectations. So realistically, it does appear that Tony Bellew and David Haye have between them done some fairly mega numbers on Sky box office, and I think this is interesting. I think this shows particularly the draw of David Haye in the sport of boxing, and it also shows how a WWE style build up and how bad blood and how all the dramatics and everything in the lead up to the fight can clearly aid pay-per-view purchase numbers when we're dealing with a casual market. And I think really this is a key thing for boxing fans to get their head round, is that the people who are buying these pay-per-views are not the hardcore boxing fans who attend events at your call. They're not the hardcore boxing fans who read boxing news, and go on the forums online. These are people who are sports fans. These are people who are football fans. These are people who, maybe don't follow boxing every week, but dip in and dip out when there's a major fight. And I think there was a cocktail of ingredients here that made this such a pay-per-view success. One of them, David Haye as an individual. Secondly, the fact that you've got two heavyweights in the British scene. A domestic British heavyweight fight always sells. And thirdly, it's got to be the bad blood. It's got to be the bad blood on the lead up to this fight. Tony Bellew, I'm not sure if he's ever headlined a pay-per-view before. I don't believe he had. He had the what headlined the pay-per-view he has against Cleverly, but I don't think Tony Bellew's ever been the A-side in a pay-per-view before. You could certainly say he was the A-side against Cleverly, but I guess in all honesty that was a 50-50 fight where each side needed the other one just as much. Kind of like the Gale Grove scenario where you need two to tango in terms of making a big pay-per-view. But in this one, David Haye was certainly the A-side. And David Haye's one of those names. He's one of those figures. I know he's done various reality TV appearances, and he's been in big fights in the past. I know the hardcore don't respect him for these fights, but Haye versus Audley Harrison, Haye versus Vladimir Klitschko, these are big events. These are events that the British public were talking about at the time. Haye Chisora, who can forget? And even his comeback against those two bin men last year, Namori and Jar Jar, those still did very good viewing numbers on Dave. So David Haye is a guy who's well known by the public, and he's a guy who knows how to hype, he knows how to promote the fight. He's a very marketable individual, both in terms of his appearance, the way he talks, and the way he fights being marketable. So for me, I'm not surprised that this was a pay-per-view success. I've had 3 or 4 people who are non-boxing friends tell me that they've bought this pay-per-view, and I'm not seeing that day to day. But typically fights like this do seem to generate the interest. They do seem to get non-boxing hardcores talking about them, and that's why. I think it's also notable that this fight had a very small undercard in terms of pay-per-view quality. If you look at the last Joshua pay-per-view, a lot of those pay-per-view buys could arguably be attributed to the Derek Chisora Dillian White fight, for example. But this pay-per-view had no real undercard, in the sense that I doubt many people, if any people, bought that pay-per-view to watch Paulie Malignaggi versus Sam Eggington, or to watch Lee Selby versus Andoni Gago, or even a Horror Davies, Derry Matthews. People bought this pay-per-view for me solely on the main event, which goes even further to show the pulling power and the marketing draw that is David Haye versus Tony Bellew. And with these numbers seemingly very, very high, with these numbers somewhere around the $750,000 mark potentially, you've got to say that the rematch has got to be even more likely. I mean, let's just do some basic maths here. Let's say that they did £750,000 pay-per-view buys at 15 quid a go. That's circa £11 million generated just through pay-per-view sales. Now I know Sky take a cut of that. I know there's all sorts of expenses, hiring a stadium, security, insurances. The list could go on and on and on. But what I'm just saying is the amount of revenue an event like this can generate. Yeah, that's 11 million quid just on pay-per-view sales, and you can expect those pay-per-view numbers to increase in a rematch for my money. I don't think those pay-per-view numbers are going down if these guys square off again. Then you've got ticket sales. What was it, 20,000 at the O2? Let's speculate the average ticket price was 100 quid. That's another £2 million. Then you've got sponsorships. There's all of these other factors. What I'm getting at is an event like this is a money-making machine. And guys like Eddie Hearn are experts at exploiting that. And that makes me think that the rematch is even more likely to happen. Look, when Joshua fought Dillian Whyte, that was rumoured to have done 450,000 pay-per-view buys. And at the time, that was viewed as an absolute smash hit. That was viewed as scary numbers. And I guess that is potentially scary numbers, given that was only a title fight at British level. That was a British title fight. Well, Haye Bellew wasn't any title fight. Yet that went and did, seemingly surpassed even the numbers that Anthony Joshua versus Dillian Whyte did. And I think that shows that the sport is growing, certainly amongst the casual market. It shows that there's more and more interest being generated amongst people who may not traditionally have been the boxing hardcore. And I think what it's also showing is the power of heavyweights in particular. We've got a lot of good fights out there at the moment. Let's put it this way: Kell Brook versus Errol Spence. That's definitely a higher level matchup than Bellew versus David Haye. But I can pretty much guarantee that Kell Brook versus Errol Spence doesn't do the numbers that Bellew versus David Haye did. I doubt Brook versus Golovkin. People say Golovkin's the best fighter in the world. That didn't do the numbers that Bellew versus David Haye did. And I think this is something that Eddie Hearn is cottoning onto with the heavyweights. I think that's why he's been inclined to sign Dillian Whyte. I think that's why he's been inclined to start working with Dave Allen, and to a lesser extent even David Price and Derek Chisora, because Eddie Hearn is very, very aware at the minute that heavyweights are the premium division in terms of fan interest. And again, that's telling you this consistent message. If you speak to the boxing hardcore, some of them will be less interested in heavyweights. They're slow, they're lumbering, they're not as athletic, they don't throw as many punches. But I think from a casual perspective, there's nothing quite like seeing two giants slugging it out. So, yeah, just some thoughts on, and a reaction, if you like, to the fact that these numbers are very, very high. And for me, what does that mean? It means that a rematch is far, far more likely. I don't think Eddie Hearn could promise the same paydays off a Bellew Parker fight or off a Bellew Wilder fight, because I don't believe the interest at the pay-per-view sales is going to be quite as high as a domestic match with a character like David Haye. And I also think in general it means we're going to be seeing more of these type of matchups. I know there's is it Lawrence Okoli, the Olympians decided to go pro at cruiserweight, for example. He's going to be having one eye on this and realising that in the long run, the money's going to be at heavyweight. Tony Bellew's going to be considering, does he want to go to cruiserweight or does he want to stay at heavyweight? Maybe he's a more natural cruiserweight than heavyweight, but he's going to look at pay-per-view sales like this, and he's going to realise that the heavyweight division is really where it's at in terms of the commercial opportunity and in terms of the fan interest. So I expect a rematch. I think that neither guy is going to be able to turn down the opportunity that the rematch presents. I believe Eddie Hearn is a massive, massive influence, and this platform at present, the Sky pay-per-view, is clearly delivering in terms of revenue generated, and it's clearly delivering for the fighters in terms of their purses. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we could debate until the cows come home. But realistically, the situation is what it is, and boxing in Britain and these pay-per-views are absolutely booming, and the demand for them is going up and up and up. So I expect more of the same. And rumours were that the Chris Eubank pay-per-view did very, very poor numbers in comparison. Some of the, if you were to believe some of the rumours out there, the Haye Bellew pay-per-view outperformed that Eubank one by 10 times. And if that is the case, that shows that Eddie Hearn is doing something right in terms of the way he's promoting his fighters. Let me know your thoughts, guys. As always, leave your comments in the section below. If you've enjoyed the video, take the time to hit the thumbs up button, please. That helps me out massively at my end. And if you're new to the channel or you haven't done so before, please do subscribe. Many thanks for tuning in.